We start the season where the previous left off, with everyone outside in forearms facing down Ultimate Agregor. The villain smirked, saying that all their powers were now his to command, but was then grabbed by Ben and thrown into a building, making it collapse onto them, then rushing them and beating them into the ground before throwing them into a jeep, making it skid across the ground. Ben then grabbed a secondary vehicle and slammed it on top of Agregor before ripping it away and throwing the villain again. He was getting to be more violent than normal, and the others were starting to worry as they watched him literally rip up an old building from the foundation and throw it at the tyrant in question. They needed to stop Ben and fast. Clearing the rubble when he'd heard Agregor moaning in pain, he then began to punch him repeatedly with all four of his fists over and over before closing his hands together and slamming them down, all onto his head at once. And he'd kept hitting them over and over until Gwen put up a shield that he'd broken through without thinking and busted Agregor in the jaw. Though once Ben realized that Gwen was trying to stop him, he turned to her. Ben began to apologize to Gwen, trying to explain himself as Agregor had begun laughing and standing up, then asked them if that was the best they could do exactly. He then stood up, telling them that he didn't feel a thing, as he then punched Ben through a building, stating that he'd become invulnerable as he wiped at his chin, realizing that he was bleeding. Getting angry, he didn't have time to process that, as the others were trying to stop Agregor and he'd beaten Kevin and blasted Max, as Forearms raced over for another round, but he'd used the strength of Andreas to slam him into the ground, creating a shockwave that took down most of the buildings around them and flew off as Ben had lost consciousness. Ben heard a familiar voice as he'd began to slowly wake up, looking around. He'd seen Azimuth there, asking him where, but was cut off by the Galvan First Thinker, who told Ben that Agregor was long gone. However, this new situation was dire enough that he'd been forced to stop all projects to try to complete the new Omnitrix before things were too late. However, it was not yet complete. Ben says that Agregor's gotten even stronger than he was before, and Azimuth says that luckily Ben had managed to stop them from completing their plans with the Andromeda aliens, though Ben looks solemn and says that they didn't stop him and that they failed. Though they heard a voice that was kind of familiar telling them that they did and that they'd owed them their lives. The group turned to the voice that spoke, seeing all of the Andromeda aliens alive, though looking worse for wear as the Ultimatrix scanned the last of the aliens that Ben didn't have. Azimuth then told the group that thanks to Ben slamming Agregor into the quartz ring, the process was cut off midway. The Andromeda aliens would survive and recover, though slowly, as it would take some time. But back to the topic at hand, he'd had information about Agregor. Ben turns to listen to what Azimuth had to say, and they told them that they no longer needed a ship with their newfound powers, as they could simply travel at their leisure now. Though he knows where the villain is going, and they needed to try to stop them as quickly as possible, and teleported them off to Galvan too. They'd rebuilt the planet after the damage they'd taken during the war. The Galvan First Thinker then made a hologram appear of something that looked to be an infinity symbol loop. Azimuth tells them that this is called the Map of Infinity, and with it anyone could travel anywhere and any when they wanted. Max says that Agregor was planning on going to the Forge of Creation, isn't he? To which the Galvan then answered that was correct. The powers he'd stolen were meant to help him survive the task. Ben says that they will stop Agregor and tells Max that he needed to stay, as Galvans had some of the best, if not the best, doctors in the Milky Way, possibly universe. Max starts to object, but the look on their face told him to shut up and get better, so he reluctantly agrees to that as Paradox showed up to continue the explanation, telling them that the map was broken into 4 and hidden for safeguarding, and that only one who has the map or knows the way can get to the Forge of Creation. Kevin asked Paradox if he was so smart, then why exactly didn't he just destroy the map instead, to which the time traveler responded, after the events of the first Agregor to try, I'd intended to destroy not only that universe's map, but all the others. However, with infinite versions of Ben, well, you get the picture. I hadn't gotten time to do so, as it would take some time to collect the pieces to destroy them. Kevin just looked confused hearing that explanation, and Ben sighs, saying that Paradox was too busy to completely destroy the map, but he'd broken it into 4 at least, which means that they only needed to stop Agregor once, and they'd be all good. Though sadly that would be a lot easier said than done. Paradox says that he could help out a bit with that, but only just a bit, bit as he was needed elsewhere and teleported Chip to them so that they could get going as quickly as possible. Gwen then asked what exactly could be more important than this, to which he'd answered that he needed to help one of the versions of Ben deal with a multi-dimensional war in which an old, or rather new as they have yet to encounter them, enemy was about to become a godlike entity. He then walked off and vanished, confusing them even more, with Azimuth saying that he'd given the coordinates to the first piece of the map to their mechamorph pet, and Ben asked to have a word with Azimuth alone for just a moment. We then cut straight to them all on a planet, with Ben telling Ship to get clear until he called because it wasn't safe for them there, as they were shivering. Ship barked his name and then flew away to find some place he could wait at, and they meet up with the Necrophrygian colonists. Though instead of fighting them, Ben explains the situation about Agrigor and says that they are there to help keep their temple and artifact safe, and only go in if it's to stop them. Since they remained outside the temple and never went in, Agrigor had to fight his way through them all and get the prize himself. But that would prove difficult, as Ben had gone alien and Kevin and Gwen had plumber suits that Kevin had done a little upgrading on so that they would be more durable towards the elements. Ben, as Big Chill, asked Agrigor if he was ready for round 2. They laughed and said he could take down them all with his new power and unleashed a shockwave onto the ground that knocked down Gwen and Kevin and pushed back the Necrophrygians. But Ben hit the Ultimatrix symbol, changing into Ultimate Big Chill, with the other Necrophrygians chattering about what Ben had just done, having never seen such a thing before. Ben then unfolds his wings out to silence their chattering and speaks, telling the villain, "Alright, Agrigor, it's just you, me, and fire so cold it burns," before taking a deep breath and blowing out flames from his mouth that covered Agrigor and froze over into the shape of a sculpted ice. The tyrant then tries to break it apart as it slowly starts to crack, and not long after the ice breaks apart, with Agrigor then trying to blast Ben with radiation from Pandor's powers. Though Ben counters with his flames, as he pushes back the radiation, the flames begin to turn to ice and he phases into the ground. Our villain then calls out to Tennyson to stop hiding and come fight him like a man, though Ultimate Big Chill appears behind him and says that he's not a man before blasting him in the back with the flames, freezing him again. He then says he's a teenager before flying upwards as Agrigor then breaks the ice, though it was barely noticeable. It took just a small bit longer that time. And getting frustrated, he tells them that he'd be back for this piece after he claimed the others before flying away in retreat. The leader of the Necrophrygian colonists called out to Ben, asking him to come forth. He goes to see what they'd wanted, and they tell him to follow them, leading them into a chamber in the temple, showing the image of a red-colored Necrophrygian sitting in the middle of a circle that was blue on one side and red on the other. The language was really old and Ben had difficulty reading it, but he could understand some parts. The leader tells them that according to the stone tapestry upon the wall, a Necrophrygian would burn red as the sun, wielding both sides of their planet's powers, in order to save the artifact from an unknown threat. They believe that he is that Necrophrygian and handed over the first piece of the map to him for safekeeping.